I'm Eleanor Loughlin. I look after the Academic Skills Programme, and what we're going to do for the next about 45 minutes is think about study skills. But we've already just had a brief chat about note-taking. Particularly as such a small group, is there anything in particular that, or something that has sort of been in your mind and you've thought, oh, I wonder about that, or is there any strategies for that you'd like me to cover? Anything at all to do with academic studies?
Just the reading. When I read, I just write down everything.
Right, okay, that's an important one.
Yeah.
We'll look at that.
Yeah, I think I have the same issue, to be honest.
A lot of people I've talked to say that because I'm just not very good at reading something and summarising it in a few words, and I need to be. And I thought that it would get better, but it hasn't so far.
Right. Are you? Can I ask what year you're in?
Yeah,
First year. Right. Okay. Oh, you've got a while to go yet. Don't worry, it will get better. But I'll talk a little bit about reading, sort of how you manage your reading and how you should be thinking about making notes. I've got a really nice quote as well there that sort of sums up the purpose of notes, so we'll look at that. Just to say, the English Language Centre do run workshops on note-taking. So there's links in these slides to the English Language Centre. They have, apart from the Academic Skills Programme, they have a separate programme of literacy skills, everything reading, writing, public speaking, that runs throughout the year. And they're very focused on particular areas of academic writing, from writing a PhD thesis to note-taking, all sorts of things. So that's worth looking at as well. Look at their programme too. Okay, well, let's make a start then. Now, I just want to flag up this from the point of view, the first thing I want to flag up is something that you probably did when you started, but it's worth just making sure that you have this information. All this stuff you're given, all these links you're given at the beginning, they are very, very valuable. So knowing about the course regulations, having the handbooks for the individual courses you're running, this it's gold dust in a way. This is the stuff that should help you plan. So knowing about when all the deadlines are, you should then be able to plan a timetable for the term. Knowing what the regulations are, say you're ill and you need an extension. I mean, there are people you can talk to in the college, of course, but having that departmental information is vital. So that should be your first port of call, for that sort of information. Now, reading and making notes. When you walk through the library, you sometimes see this. Now, unless by a process of osmosis, people asleep on a pile of books are expecting to take the information in, this is not a productive way of working. So what people sometimes do, let's have a look at what's gone on here and why this is not the right approach to reading. This is what we call passive reading, somebody who ends up like this. And I'll explain what the passive reader does. The passive reader, they have a list of things they're going to read, and that's usually the bibliography for the piece of work or the course text. And they find a book and they start reading, and they usually start reading at the beginning of the book and they carry on reading, and then as they read a book they find an interesting footnote and they stop reading the book and start reading the footnotes. And then they find an article, and then they start looking through the article, and they find another interesting footnote, and they carry on down this path, and then they find a reference to another book. So they sort of amass all this literature, but they're not actually really engaging in depth with any of it, and often by the end of the day, they've maybe read one thing off their initial list. So, what's going wrong here? What should this person be doing if that's happening? Any thoughts? What should you be telling yourself when you find that interesting footnote? What should you do?
Write it down.
Absolutely. Write it down so you've got a record of it. I always used to have a diary for that. You may very well keep it electronically these days, but I just used to have a notebook where I wrote down interesting looking things, because quite often what happens is at the end of the day, if you have a look at the things you wrote down, in the sort of cold light of day, it might actually not seem as valuable as it did when you first saw it. So you're better sticking with what you've set yourself. So it's important that you have a clearly defined list and you stick with it. Now, in terms of identifying what you read, I just want to say a couple of things about this. You may get a bibliography for a piece of work that has key resources and additional text. That's great if it's divided up that way. Work with the key text first and then go to the additional, because chances are that not all of those additionals will be relevant for you. Another thing to think about is which of the texts to start with. So if I ask you, you've got a list of 10 pieces of work, and you're wondering where to begin in terms of reading. They've not been prioritised, it's just alphabetical by author. What might be the things that lead you to start with one rather than another?
The keywords in them.
Yeah, so you're looking for words that align with your particular essay or your particular piece of work. What else?
Textbooks, like the more general one first.
Yeah, so you're looking for those key texts, those textbooks, those ones that are, the names keep cropping up again and again. That's good introductory, solid text. Anything else?
Year of publication.
Yes, now what would you be looking for?
The recent ones for the most up-to-date information.
Absolutely. So go for the recent ones. Now, if there's an author that's on there more than once, again, that's usually an indication, or if it's an author you've heard mentioned in lectures, that's an indication that they are an authority, so go with them. If there are several things by the same author, there is a temptation to start with the earliest and come up to where they are now. You're actually better starting with the last piece of work, because very often academics summarise what they've done before in their last piece of work. But as a rule, go for recent publications. So that's a sort of way to prioritise your reading list. And stick with your reading list, write the interesting stuff down. Now, you all know about your reading lists, finding them online. You're okay with that? Yeah, great. Something else to flag up. There are, on the library pages, there are resources by subject. So say you're looking to search a particular area, there is guidance on which of the search engines are good for your subject area. There's also a liaison librarian for your subject. Have you met your liaison librarian, or have they given a presentation? Yeah?
Oh, maybe.
Maybe the liaison librarian is somebody who is a specialist in finding information in your subject area. So if you are working on a project or a piece of work and you are absolutely stumped on finding information, contact your liaison librarian, and they are quite happy to have a one-to-one meeting with you to talk through search strategies and also search engines and resources you can use. But as I said, the subject librarians also build up resources online as well. So do make use of them. They are a very, very good resource. Because the fact of the matter is that there's new search engines, new databases appearing every week. So it's their job to keep on top of those. So we're reading in an active way, we're planning what we're going to read, we're sticking to what we've set ourselves, and we're just making notes of the interesting things that come up. How do we make notes? So, what are the value of notes? What purpose do they serve? Now, you've said that you tend to write down everything. You might as well have a photocopy, I would imagine, in some instances. So what is the point of note-taking? Any ideas?
So that you can revisit the information later, but at a faster pace.
Yes, now that's a key point. It should be a condensation, almost a compression, an extraction of the key points. Now, you need to make good notes. You need to have a clear sense of what you're looking for. So when you're planning a piece of work, say you're doing some work on, let's think, Icelandic oil fields, something like that, if they have any. I'm assuming they do. So you're doing a piece of work on that, and you find interesting things about Icelandic agriculture or fisheries. That's not relevant. Don't bother with that. Or you find things on North Sea oil. Again, not relevant. Don't follow that. So you've got to stay completely focused on what it is for you, that piece of work that you need. Now your mind's saying, but I want all this information because I might use it in the future. Well, the fact of the matter is you can go back in the future and read the book again. And certainly you'll find as you go through your studies, you're doing a research degree, aren't you? I'm sure you've found this, that as you go through, you read texts at different points in your studies and you get different things from them. Yeah, and that's because every time you read, you're not the same person. You're reading with different interests, you're reading with a different level of understanding. So when you read, there's no point writing everything down because you won't get everything. Or you won't get it in a way that will necessarily be useful later. So make notes that extract what you need now. And here's what I think is a great quote that just about sums up what notes should be. So it's not just shorthand or a copy of the original. As it says, it's about picking the bones. The things that are relevant to your studies at the moment. Okay, any thoughts on note-taking or advice? Want to share on note-taking? Anyone use anything, something useful that helps them with note-taking? No. Do any of you use OneNote or Evernote? Familiar with that? Software. The university supports OneNote, and that can be a useful tool. If you're making notes electronically, you can sort of collect the notes together, you can work with them, you can put in references and images. If you are somebody who's making notes electronically, then that can be a really useful thing to do. Personally, I write my notes, that's how my brain works, that's how I prefer to work. But within that, think about, don't just write it and then leave it. Think about, what are my key points? Use highlighters and underline things. And you can even read your notes again and think of something else. So start annotating your notes, make notes on your notes in the margin, and you'll find that they become even more useful. Because notes, reading is important, it's key to learning, but notes is when you really start to learn. When you start to write, that's when you start to process and you start to learn. Okay, any questions about notes? Note-taking? Okay. Now, there is one thing, and this goes back to our earlier brief discussion about referencing. We were talking about referencing. And referencing, it's an area where it's really important that you do reference effectively. Are you all fine with referencing? Got referencing sorted? Right. I won't dwell on this, but let's just, the notion of plagiarism. Let's just try, I've got some 4 examples of student behaviour. See if you can say whether or not this is plagiarism or not, in terms of how it will be interpreted. So there's the first one. Can you read that okay? Okay. So, is that fine, or is there a problem with that?
Is the citation in a caption, or is it just me in the image? Does it matter?
I think it would probably be under the caption, a caption with the image. Yeah.
I don't think that's plagiarism.
Is everyone okay with that one? Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, that's a key point that you identify there. It's important that the citation is, now we all know that if you're in text referencing, then the citation is at the end or in the sentence. When you're citing images, it's got to be under the image in the caption. So that's absolutely fine. Now, what about this one? What's gone wrong here? This is plagiarism. What mistake, and this actually is very, very common. What mistake do you think the students made in terms of their understanding of what plagiarism is?
Do you think it's maybe just published authors?
Yes, exactly. And it's not. So it's really important. And this can be an issue if you're working in groups. So if you're working with somebody, you're being really careful where your work ends, their work begins. So it can be collusion even can be an issue. But this is a key thing. Whether or not it is published, if it is somebody else's work, it needs referencing. Now, if it's not published academic work, so say you go to a conference and somebody circulates an unpublished paper, or somebody says something really fascinating and you have the slides and you'd like to include that, it is courtesy just to ask them before you do actually refer to it. Not your lecturer in lectures and things like that, but if you go to an academic conference, it is just courtesy to say, would you mind if I include this in my project or whatever. And emphasise that you're not going to be publishing your work. It's actually, I've found over the years as a researcher, that that's actually a good way of making contact with people. So you're starting that conversation because they usually email back and say, oh right, what are you looking at? What's your area of interest? So that's worth thinking about. Now let's try, got two more. So, is this acceptable, or would this be classed as plagiarism?
Plagiarism.
Yeah. Why? What mistake has the student made here?
She's direct quoting, but she's not acknowledging it. Like she needs to rephrase it if she wants to do it this way, or use direct quotation marks.
Absolutely. There is a myth, and I'm sure none of you have succumbed to it, that change 3 words in a paragraph and it's no longer plagiarism. This is not the case. It is important that if you are working with somebody's text like that and you're not going to be quoting them, that it's paraphrased. So that's what's gone wrong here. And the final one. Is that okay? Yeah, that's fine. That's what that student should have done. So it's just being mindful of this and being careful about it. There is a session, the library running this term, and I'll give you a copy of this at the end, on referencing plagiarism and copyright. That's, if this is an area you wanted to explore, that's an option. Okay, there's one other thing. What is common knowledge? Now, this is an issue, isn't it, sometimes here about common knowledge and what exactly is it. Here's 3 options. Which of these would you say is common knowledge? A definition of common knowledge? 3? Yeah, absolutely. So, the sky is blue. There we go, common knowledge. It actually isn't, but heck, that's common knowledge. So those sorts of things are common knowledge. It can get a bit tricky because sometimes you get so immersed in your academic discipline, you think something's common knowledge, whereas in fact it's not. So you just have to be mindful of that. Okay, now I was going to move on to some more things about writing. Is that okay? Writing. So, as I've said, writing is when you really start to work with the material. It's really when you start to learn, when you start to critically analyse, evaluate, and develop your argument. So it's important that you don't fall into the trap of reading, then taking notes, then writing. I would say as soon as you start reading, start taking notes, and then start writing things up as soon as you've got some information. The best way to write an essay isn't to wait until you've got 20, 30 pages of notes. It's actually to map it out beforehand, and as you start to collect these notes, start to fit them into the sections of the essay. Where's that going? Where's that going? Am I developing this idea? What are my conclusions going to be? So working with the material as you collect it. Now the thing about writing is it is almost like physical exercise. You can't run a marathon if you don't run regularly. And the same is true with writing, and it's so important, particularly with an eye to projects, dissertations, thesis, that you start writing early. So key things about writing: snack, don't binge. So writing regularly, I say on a daily basis, is the best way. Actually timetabling in writing. So in your diary, you may have time blocked out for reading and note-taking. I would put in periods of time, maybe every day or every couple of days, when you're actually writing things up. So it's in the diary and it's more likely to happen. If you're somebody who struggles getting started with writing, then you can use free writing to get started. Is anyone familiar with free writing? I'll give you a copy of this then. So free writing is a great technique to use if you are suffering from writer's block. There we go. Okay. You find it hard getting started writing in the morning. So the idea is it's like a warm-up. You write for 5 minutes and you write without stopping. You write in sentences, but the whole thing doesn't need to make a whole lot of sense. It's private writing, you're not going to share it with anyone else, and no overall structure needed beyond the sentences. And what you need to do is take something like one of these headings here. So it might be the main question that interests me, or I have nothing to write about because. That's always an interesting one, because often in the process of writing it, you do actually figure out where the problems are and where you can get started. I've used things like I don't know where to begin with this piece of work, and in the process of writing that down, you figure out where's the place you're going to start writing. So it's a warm-up exercise, it gets you writing, and it often gives you a way into what you're trying to write. So free writing can be very, very useful. Now, setting writing goals and creating a writing plan. Now, for some people, that is a certain number of words a day. Do any of you set yourself words a day? No? That can be a useful thing, but the problem with that can be that some days you may be able to write 1,000 words, a quite general introduction or something, but other days you might really struggle with 300 words of in-depth analysis. So other things to think about is setting yourself a goal of maybe you're going to be submitting a piece of work and breaking it down into the different stages. So you're thinking about, when am I going to write literature review element possibly, the introduction, the conclusion, the main body, so you're breaking it down that way, and timetable those activities. What you can also do, if you're struggling to start, is to use a timer and set the timer for 15 minutes. And when the timer goes off, take a 5-minute break, and it has to only be 5 minutes, and then start again. Now, what that does is if you're having trouble getting started, it's often because you're thinking, I'm going to be here for the next 2 hours writing, and that's daunting. So if you think, I'm only going to have to write for 15 minutes, then I get a 5-minute break, you're more likely to get started. And you find usually after about 2 or 3 chunks of 15 minutes, you don't need a break, you're writing, and that's fine. So that can be a good way to get started.
Is that the same as Pomodoro?
That's the one, yes. Have you used that?
My friend recently introduced me to it, and I've got the app, but I haven't started using it yet because I haven't started writing an essay.
Yeah, the
It's
Pomodoro
useful.
technique. Yeah, have you used it?
Yeah.
Or yeah, have you found it useful?
Yes, especially at the beginning, like you do need some break.
Yeah, absolutely. And the full Pomodoro technique is quite complicated. There's a whole load of other stuff in with it, but for me, it's the timer that is the key thing, the breaking it down. Is anyone using any other strategies to manage the writing? Well, finally, one thing you can do is commitments to other people. This can be really useful if you're working in a group project. So if you're working on a group project, it's important that you set deadlines. And you set deadlines, say you're pulling a piece of work together, you've each got to have completed your piece of work well in advance to be able to put it all together as a coherent whole. That's really important. But if you are working on a group project, deadlines for each person and the group as a whole are key. But also, it might be that you have a friend who's doing the same course and they can't sort of create an essay together, that would be collusion. You can sort of set yourself deadlines of, okay, I'm going to do this by then, and then discuss how far you've got. So making a time commitment to other people, be that an academic, a tutor, or a friend, or people you're working with, it means things are more likely to get done. So that's worth thinking about. Now, in terms of support, I mentioned the English Language Centre. So they have workshops that are open, undergraduate, postgraduate, throughout the year. And another service they provide is one-to-one consultations. Has anyone been to the English Language Centre, one-to-one consultations? Yeah, did you find it useful?
Yes, I went before writing, like just with my structure, and it was really helpful to go from the notes to the final essay.
Yeah, so it is. I mean, that's really useful. You can go with a structure, or you can go with a piece of work. Maybe you've had a piece of work back and you're not quite sure what they mean in terms of feedback. Maybe it says this section should include more criticality, or it should be more reflective, or the structure isn't quite right, but it isn't clear exactly how they want it to be structured. You can take a piece of work along, and one of the tutors will talk through it with you. And they're happy dealing with a first-year essay or a chunk of a PhD. So you can take any sort of work along. And that is open to all students. So if you go into the English language pages, you'll find the information about that. And the other side to writing is, of course, thinking about the feedback you get. What do you do with your feedback? Good. That's the key thing. It's so tempting just to look at the grade and think, yeah, right, that's great, and push it to one side. But the feedback is key. You've got to look beyond the grade, and you've got to ask yourself, do I understand this feedback? Does it make sense? And don't take it personally. Sometimes people write feedback in a way that implies there's a problem with you, but it's not you, it's the piece of work. So it's about the work, and use feedback as feed forward. And if you don't understand the feedback, ask the person who marked it, or ask one of the academics or a college tutor or the English Language Centre, because the best way to improve is to actually take that feedback on board. Now, the next thing I've got down to talk about is seminars. Just briefly, the importance of seminars. But does anyone have any questions or comments about writing? Okay. So my question is this: why are seminars so important?
You can easily ask questions. As
Yeah.
opposed to lectures.
Absolutely, it's a forum for discussion, isn't it? Yeah.
It's active learning in a way.
Hmm.
It's not as passive as lectures can be.
Absolutely. And it's because you're engaged, you often retain more of that. So let's have a think about the value of seminars. Another factor is that it is collective. So in joining in a seminar discussion, you are in fact fine-tuning your own ideas. I'm sure you've had that situation where you've said something in a group discussion, and as you're saying it, you're realising something new. So you're sort of fine-tuning your ideas as you're speaking. But it's also, somebody might say something that you think, now I hadn't thought of that. So it's about thinking around the subject. Seminars are so important from that point of view. So just some very basic, I'm sure you're aware of these, but just to reinforce the importance of preparing for timetables. We focus a lot on timetabling essays and work to be submitted, but it is so important that you make time to prepare for your seminars. And if you're in a group with people you don't know, that can be a bit daunting. You know, do make the effort to get to know other people. How do you feel participating in seminars? Do you feel okay, or yeah, okay? So I won't dwell on that, other than to say, the thing about a seminar is sometimes people say, but the lecturer will be, or the person who's taking the seminar, they might be marking my work, and they might bear in mind my seminar participation when they're marking my work. Well, I can assure you they absolutely don't. It is separate. So even if you've got a daft idea, share it in the seminar. And the thing to remember is that people are listening to you, but they're not focusing on what you're saying. What they're focusing on is what they're thinking and what they're going to say next. So it's important that you don't overly worry about that. So go through that. In terms of taking part, don't be afraid to ask for clarification, because if you don't get it, chances are somebody else doesn't. Give people feedback on the comments, and it's always good if somebody says something that's really clever, really useful, then tell them, because that gives them a boost and that makes for a more positive group. Examinations. I know you've not been through the joy that is exams yet, and you don't have exams. So again, I won't dwell on this, but just to flag up from the exam point of view, as soon as the timetables are out, are they out yet? No, don't think so.
Just the exam period, but not
Okay.
precisely.
Not yet. It's important to keep the whole exam period free, and occasionally they have to reschedule them, so it's important that you are available in case something goes wrong. So if you're having a problem, talk to your tutors well in advance. Okay. Now, I think what I'll do is I'll bring it to a close. I know you've got to go. That's okay. Just want to flag up two things: the academic skills programme, the library workshops, and I'll give you that as well.
Oh, thank you.
about 3 things there that might be of interest. So the academic skills programme, there's information, workshops, one-to-one support in all these areas. There's a lot of information about the services that CIS run, English Language Centre Library. It's all brought together in these pages, so you can look at that there. If you're doing maths in any way at all, be that hardcore maths or stats, then there is a drop-in service. It's run by PhD researchers, and these are the times. Anyone just come along with your maths problem, and they will help you with that. They do your homework for you, sort of thing, but they do talk you through the issues. And there's also Math Lab pages. There's a lot of resources there about choosing the right way of analysing statistics and things like that. So there's a lot of online resources to do with maths support.